Hi guys, Rhi here. Welcome back to another episode of Real Talk with Rhi. Thank you so much for joining me once again. Now today I'm going to be answering another question I've had sent in. It's another one about autism. I get so many questions sent in via email, on my DMs, mainly on my main Instagram account, which is my Mummy of 4 UK one. I get questions a lot on my main channel and the videos and things, and some of you here on the podcast, especially on the podcast channel. Hello if you're watching on YouTube. Hello also if I'm in your earphones and you're listening on audio only. But if you do ever want to leave me a question to answer in an upcoming episode, then all the details will be found below the video or the audio podcast episode that you are listening to, because I feel like sometimes I just can't answer a question fully enough just by responding to a comment, and some of them they just deserve a whole episode to themselves, which is kind of what we're doing today. So the question that I had sent in specifically is, do you think having an older child assessed could actually be detrimental if the outward signs are not too obvious? So if they seem to be coping, do you think we should just drop it? Or, which is what we're concerned about, could she be masking so well there are other implications we're not seeing and that are not obvious yet? So I think the bigger question here is, why bother getting an autism assessment? Why bother at all? And I'm just going to share with you why I feel it's important, or why I felt it was important for my family, for my children. If you're new here, hello. I do have 4 children, all of which have a diagnosis for autism. I'm not going to go into the full family history story, but there are previous episodes you can find on the channel where I discuss all that in more detail if you're interested in that and you don't know where we're coming from yet. There's also a whole playlist on my main channel of videos about autism that explains in a lot more depth about my specific children. But that's not exactly what we're going to talk about today. We are just going to say, why to bother getting an assessment? Why bother getting an assessment? What are the benefits of it? And this answer is very much my own opinion. I'm not a doctor. I'm a mum with a lot of experience with children with autism, but they are only my children with autism. So each person with autism is different, just as each human is different, I guess. So my experiences obviously are unique to my children. So what I'm saying may or may not resonate, may or may not apply. And I just wanted to kind of clarify that this is just my own opinion. So with all that being said, why I bothered getting an assessment for my children and why I felt it was important for my family, there are actually lots of different reasons, some of them bigger than others. And hopefully that will come back to answering, is it worth having an older child assessed? So we will get to that. So the biggest thing about getting an assessment, I think, is that it's not going to change anything, which is perhaps not what you want to hear, but let me elaborate. So yes, it can change how you behave, how you access help for that child, how you cope with challenges that are faced. It can change a lot of the action you choose to take, but it's not going to change your actual child. It's not going to make any difference to whether or not they have autism. So if they have autism and they don't get assessed, they still have autism. Or if they don't have autism and they get assessed, then they still don't have autism. Do you know what I mean? And if they get assessed and they do or they don't, then the only difference is that you know. That's the only difference. It's not actually going to make the autism there or not there. It's either there or it's not there. And the assessment will either tell you it's there or tell you it's not there. That might sound really, really obvious, but I think a lot of people worry that it's going to put their child through something. And I know there are certain medical tests that are very invasive. You know, if your child's got certain medical conditions, they might have to have operations or, you know, exploratory whatever, or injections, medications. But the autism assessment is not invasive. I can't speak for all parents of children who have been assessed, but the assessments themselves did not cause my children any distress. If you've watched my vlogs where I'm fighting for the assessment, I found it all a little bit of an emotional roller coaster, yes, but quite frankly, parenting a child with additional needs can be a bit of an emotional roller coaster anyway. So I don't regret for 1 second having kind of fought for those assessments. So I think my point I'm getting back to is it doesn't negatively impact the child in my experience. The assessment wasn't unpleasant for them. It was playing games in effect. It was talking, it was looking at things. And yes, I'm sure that some children with autism, because the very nature of autism is because children can be prone to melting down, I'm sure some children end up having a meltdown. I would imagine that happens. But equally, those same children could have a meltdown if they're at home. And then you still don't know it is autism, if it's not autism, you don't know what you're dealing with. So I would say that it's well worth doing just because it's just going to tell you what is or is not there rather than changing what is or not is not there. I hope that makes sense. It will, of course, make a massive difference to how then you can respond to what is there, to support what is there, to identify needs that are there and to meet those needs. So we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. The second reason I found it helpful to get my children assessed was to stop second guessing myself. I spent so much time toing and froing. Yes, it's there, especially, well, I guess with all of them. I was going to say especially with subsequent children, but even having my first child assessed, I went through swinging between, oh, I'm wasting my time here. There's nothing, there's nothing going on. I'm seeing things that aren't there, and no, there's definitely something here. But I feel like more so with subsequent children, I was swinging between, am I seeing autism everywhere because I'm surrounded by autism and therefore seeing things that aren't there? So thinking that another child might have autism even though they don't. Or do I just know much more about it and I'm much more likely to pick it up? Turns out in my case, it was the second was true, that I was noticing things that other people weren't seeing, partly because I was far more tuned into it because I'd been living with it and doing the research and things, and just partly because being a parent, you're going to see more potentially, because in the case of my children, they definitely mask more out and about for other people and save the meltdowns for me, which is fine. It's because I'm in a safe space. But it does mean that the school didn't see as much evidence as I had seen. But if I'd never had the children assessed, I'd still be in that second guessing. Oh, should I have done this? Should I have done that? Should I have got them assessed? Oh, no, it's nothing. Should I have done this? Oh, should I pursue this? No, it's nothing. And that in itself is quite draining and exhausting. And you're perhaps better off expending that energy being able to think, right, okay, this is what I'm dealing with and this is what I'm going to do, rather than second guessing yourself. And maybe other people aren't quite as in their head as I am, but I know I went back and forth a lot. And ultimately, the truth is the waiting lists are so long that if you're back and forth about it and you haven't made a full decision yet, I would say just get their names down. And worst comes to the worst, and you get to the point where you're offered an appointment in probably years and years' time, and you feel that actually you were seeing things that weren't there and you genuinely, like, there are zero concerns, you can just say, we're all good, thank you, we don't need the appointment, please give it to someone else. But if you are doing all that dithering and the back and forth and the second guessing yourself before you even initiate the process, and if you are, oh, we're going to see how it goes, I know so many people that have really regretted that, because then by the time they get their child's name down and there's this years and years of waiting in front of them, then they're that much further behind than if they just got the child's name down. You could always, if you absolutely have decided for whatever reason this is not what you want, you've changed your mind, you could always get your child's name removed from that list. But if you don't get their name on the list, you don't get them in the queue while you're dithering, because it's a very natural stage to go through. Oh, I don't know what to do. Oh no, see, I know. Oh, they're just quirky. They just have their little ways. I think we're fine as we are for now. I don't know. Oh, maybe we do. Oh no, actually, maybe we don't. If during that dithering stage you get your name down, future you might be really, really grateful for it, because in the future you might be like, well, that came to something and nothing. They grew out of whatever I was worried about. Or it might be, actually the difficulties increased a lot. Thank goodness I put their name down. So the second guessing yourself, it can be exhausting, and then you second guessing yourself thinking how you should parent them, how you should deal with situations. At least having an answer helps to alleviate a bit of that. So the next thing is obviously understanding your child. So if you know your child has autism and they'll tend to, during the assessment process, break down your child's specific difficulties, you can be more aware of what your child's difficulties are and you can help prepare them for things. So if you know your child has autism and responds better to routine, you can put those things in place. If you know that they have specific sensory issues, you can put things in place to avoid them being triggered by those issues. If you know that they're triggered by noises, you can use ear defenders. If you know that crowds are difficult, then you can put things in place for that. Just having that understanding of your child it just gives you the opportunity to know where to start. And I'm not saying there's going to be zero challenges from there on in, but it's like you've got some stuff in your toolkit and you've got resources and you've got some stuff in your backpack and you're not just out there in the wild, blindly in the dark, not knowing where to turn and not knowing where to go and not having any map or resources or food or water. And I feel like when the more information you've got, then the more likely you are to be able to tackle the things that you are going to be faced with. And when you're faced with situations like your child having a meltdown, you can know. So, like, for example, I'm going to give you an example. I'm sure he won't mind me saying this. We talk about this quite a lot. He is amazing at eating now. He is 11 and he's probably the most adventurous eater of the whole family. He's amazing. And this is even more miraculous because when he was a baby and he first started baby-led weaning, he was amazing to eat everything. And then he got into this phase where he would only eat these really, really, really specific meals. So he was about to start school into Rising Threes nursery where he was going in the afternoons. He had started school, actually, tell a lie. He'd already had started school because the assessment started during that process. So it went through the health visitor, but it was while he was in school. Anyway, he was having these really rigid things he'd eat. And I said to the consultant when I finally got her on the phone for the first time I spoke to her, I said, look, I know you can't tell me if he does have autism or if he doesn't have autism. You can say it sounds that there are indicating factors that we might be dealing with autism here. But I know you said that, I don't expect you to give me a diagnosis over the phone, but what do you say about this issue I'm facing if it is autism? I said, look, it's a really healthy thing to eat, but it's very, very rigid. It has to be this exact meals to the point where if we went to eat out for food, I'd have to take this food with me. I couldn't order food off any menu with him, which is absolutely mad to think that that's how he was because, like I say, he's the most adventurous eater of all of us now. We went through a whole load of things to progress from there to here. Perhaps that's a chat for another day. Let me know if you want me to talk about that. But anyway, I said to her, should I just be saying, look, this is your food, you need to and be sort of quite firm with introducing new foods, or should I just carry on just feeding him what I know he'll eat? She said, for a healthy neurotypical child, they will not let themselves starve. So this is your dinner, if you're hungry, you'll eat it kind of method. For a neurotypical child, they would not starve themselves. She said, but a child with autism quite possibly would. So I just think that realization, that kind of information from that consultant at that time, I'm not saying that I would have been like, here's your food, eat it or starve. But it kind of guided which direction we took with trying to introduce new foods and things. And it just, that understanding of, well, actually, this thing that people tell you to do would never work for my child, would never work, kind of gave me permission, not any permission, but just made me realize and gave me that permission to ignore that advice that I was being given by certain people in my life. So that is another reason. It's just being able to understand your child and parent them to their specific needs, which you won't necessarily be aware of, again, because they might be masking some of them. And obviously there's understanding themselves. So I think this, again, is another topic for another day about how I talk about autism with my children and how we bring it up with them and various things. But in a nutshell, we say that everyone has difficulties. Some people struggle with spelling. My children don't especially struggle with that. They don't especially struggle with academic. Some people struggle to learn to read. And, you don't. You find that quite easy. And I'm not saying all people with autism don't struggle with those things, but my specific children don't struggle with those things. Some people struggle with reading maps and directions and things. Hold my hand up there. I'm absolutely rubbish at following directions when it comes to if people like reel off directions to me. They do not compute in my brain. And some people struggle with the things that children struggle with perfectionism and making mistakes or having to stand in a queue or change of routine. And the collection of difficulties that they face just happen to be called autism. And some of the people that we know have autism, and some of the people that you see on telly have autism, and some people have autism they don't even know. And they're like, so do they have that like us? Or and in fact, when my youngest was being assessed, it's like, so does she have it like us or is she not? And they're like, yeah, she does, just like you. I'm like, oh, cool, just like us. And they just had that understanding of it's not that big a deal. It's just something, their particular struggle. Because everyone struggles with something. There's no one, I dare you to find me a person on this planet that doesn't struggle with something, that doesn't find something challenging or difficult. It's just not all struggles have as much understanding or a label. Like you could be painfully shy but not have autism, and that would be a real struggle. It wouldn't have a label or help to access, but it would be a real challenge, wouldn't it? If you were so painfully shy that you struggled in work or whatever, So, but having that without an autism diagnosis, because I guess you could be painfully shy and have autism as well, but to just be painfully shy would be a challenge. And that is some people's challenge. So that's how I've explained it to my children. And I think they have that understanding themselves that there are certain things that they can't help the way they feel, but equally there are things that we can put in place to make things easier. And they really help with that understanding. And they help, and it does help, especially with my eldest, who, again, I've chatted to him a fair bit about this. I didn't discuss his diagnosis at the time. I don't think there's anything on my main channel. I think it's just here on the podcast that I've chatted about it. But he was diagnosed during his A-levels, and initially wasn't especially happy about it. Went through a bit of a difficult time with it, which I guess is coming back to this question of, is it good to have an older child assessed? So I explained at the time that we just needed to know what was going on so that when he had any challenges in the future, we knew how to deal with them. And at the time, he felt like I had done this to him by getting him assessed. And he wasn't especially impressed with me, which is why I didn't discuss it. I didn't discuss it was happening. I didn't discuss it had happened. And now he's 19 and he's like, Mum, I'm really sorry the way I behaved. Like, you're entitled to your feelings, and I'm your mum. We went through with the assessment because the school agreed it was required. It wasn't just coming from me. And I feel like it was my job to be his mum and not just his friend. So as his friend, I could have just been like, well, but as his mum, as a parent, I think that's the really difficult thing, especially as your children get older, to do what's best for them, not just what's most popular with them. And I knew it was best to know what we were dealing with, because that way, when he got to university, he needed any extra support, then he'd be able to access that. So at the time, it's like he wasn't very impressed. And I said, look, I'm really sorry. It hasn't changed anything. It hasn't changed you. It's just told us what's there. If you don't want to tell anyone about this and you never want to do anything with this, that's your choice. You don't have to. This is not going to be something tattooed on your forehead. If you don't want to disclose this to anyone, if you don't want to discuss it, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And he understood about the little ones having autism, and he thought that was all cool. He just didn't want it for himself. He didn't. And as he got older, and we've talked about this in depth, he said he was really sorry for the way he behaved, because he was in denial, because I think it just brought up some of the things, his struggles, some of the things he'd struggled with throughout his life, and it just made it all a little bit real. And now he's very chilled. He's very much like the little ones about it, like, oh, well, that's just how it is. And apparently now when he's meeting new people, he's like, well, I very much want to remember your name, but I have autism, so chances are I'm not going to. That's just something I'm... So if I don't remember your name, it's not because I don't want to. It's not because I'm being rude. It's not because I don't like you. I'm just not very good at that. So so he kind of just says it in a very laid back kind of way. And I think it takes the pressure off him in social situations, because he's really not good at remembering people's names, and that's something he struggles with. Not necessarily something all people with autism struggle with. It's not something the little ones necessarily struggle with, but it is something he struggles with. So he just really feels like he has this understanding of himself now, and he's read over his reports. I give him all his reports, which he didn't even want to look at initially, and he's read over them all recently. And he, initially, when he went to university, he didn't want to bring it up. He didn't want to discuss it. Didn't want to access any help. And now, having been there for a while, he has realised he does need just a bit of support. Sometimes like navigating the timetables, or there are some like very specific things that he just sometimes needs a bit of extra help with, and he's been able to access that. Without an assessment, he wouldn't have been able to do that. So even though at the time, during that moment, he didn't want to be assessed, he totally thinks it was absolutely for the best, and I agree. Now, I think at the time he was reluctant but not adamant about the assessment. If he'd been adamant about the assessment, things might have been different, but he was just like, not happy, but whatever, kind of, disgruntled teenager, but not adamant he didn't want it. When the diagnosis came through, he just didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to tell anyone, didn't want to tell the place where he was doing his A-levels. And he could have had extra time in exams and things. He would have been entitled to that. He would have been entitled to just certain things like being able to take a breather from an exam if he was feeling overwhelmed. And now at least he'll have access to that should he wish to take it up if he actually needs it. So, he's got that option, and he just seems so, best way to put it, so like good with himself compared to how he was before. And obviously teenage years are really challenging anyway, especially teenage years through COVID. So he's one of the COVID kids that didn't get to do A-levels because it was his A-levels were, she said he's not A-levels. His exams, he was due to take his exams in 2020. So he did really, really well, but it was based on, the work up to that point. They were a group of kids that were robbed of experiences they should have had, I guess, and a lot of time to kind of like grow up and things. Okay, so understanding from others. This is massive. So it's like when my eldest will ask people to realise he's not being rude because he can't remember a name. Or I can think of an example. We went to stay in a Premier Inn, and Will was absolutely adamant that we'd had some sort of chocolate muffins with the breakfast. And he was really fussy, don't eat certain things. So he wanted one of these chocolate muffins. And I said, look, I'm really sorry. I know there aren't any out. If someone's really, really hoping for one of these chocolate muffins, I'm quite upset. Is there any chance you've got anything similar? Could I buy something off the other menu, whatever? Because I saw they had something sort of similar later in the day in the menu. And this woman was looking at me like, can you not just control your child? Is your child having a bit of a tantrum, And I could see that she was just not impressed with me. And then I said, like, I'm really sorry. I don't mean, I know this is like extra fuss for you, but he has autism. So he was just really had this rigid idea in his head. This is what he had last time. And do you know what? As soon as I said the A word, suddenly her attitude totally changed from, can this woman not control her child, to, oh, well, okay, I totally understand. And let me help you. And, oh, of course, we won't charge you for this. And she was just so lovely. And that's what I needed in that moment. That made such a difference to our day. So we were staying away. I can't remember where we were going, some sort of theme park or something. A meltdown at the beginning of that day really could have impacted the whole day. And this woman's kindness really did turn the day around. So that was massive. I can't even tell you what a difference that made. So just having that understanding from other people. The other concern is, I think, if your child, and I don't know if this is the case as much anymore, but I think my worry was if there was autism at play, and this is more so the case if your child is more the kind of boisterous or busy type of child rather than a withdrawn type child. But Will was quite busy when he was very little, and I was really worried that he's a very, very bright and he'd end up bored and disruptive and just labelled naughty by the teachers, naughty or difficult, rather than having the understanding he needed. And he really has thrived, and I honestly believe that's because of the understanding that he's been able to have through school, and that's made such a difference. So having that understanding from your teaching staff, from the teachers that teach your child, and I think that was a big weight off my mind when Will went to secondary school, going from this like very nurturing small primary school where all the teachers know all the kids' names and everyone, knew and loved him, to going up to having, what do they have, 10, 12 different teachers if you add up all the lessons. Like, all those teachers cannot know all of those children. And I didn't want one of those teachers to not understand his needs and then for there to be conflict. So by just having that understanding, I just felt more comfortable with him progressing on to the next stage of education in mainstream school with the support that is in place for him. And then just things like lines at theme parks. So when we went to Disneyland Paris, we were able to use the disability access system. No, sorry, disability access system is Florida, DAS. The priority access system in Disneyland Paris. I have got videos over on my Mummy of Four Does Disney channel about both of those if you want to check those out. If you just search Mummy of Four Does Disney and autism or disability or priority access, DAS, that kind of thing. Any of those search terms should take you to those videos. But they should be, if they're not, actually, I will put together a playlist about disability access type stuff across the Disney parks. So because obviously that's relevant information. But yeah, you'll be able to find all that on YouTube. And you know what? I'll link them below from this video and the show notes too. So the next one is the assessment uncovers things that could be masked. So I think this was in the question, wasn't it? The lady that wrote in said, which we're concerned about, could she be masking things? There are other implications for things that we're not seeing, things that are not obvious yet. And this is 100% a reason to get your child assessed, because things were pointed out to me in each of my children's assessments that I was like, whoa, that's blown my mind a little bit, because I had never noticed that before. Like one of them, I can't remember which one it was off the top of my head. I can remember one of them saying that they don't talk with their hands at all. And I'm very like, oh, have you ever watched me? I find it quite hard to keep still. This helps actually. I'm filming at the moment. I'm holding, if you're watching, you can see, but if you're listening, I'm holding my podcasting microphone. So it gives me something to do with my hands, because I talk with my hands a lot. But this assessment came out and it came back as they don't use typical gesture. And it was like, wow, I can see it now. How have I never noticed that before? I'm this child's mother. But sometimes when you're so close to things, it's hard to see them. So sometimes they will be able to point out things that your child is struggling with that you would not have seen. And then the biggest thing is, I think, that you just don't know what the future holds. So a lot of parents I've heard say, oh, we're fine, we're coping fine, we're coping with the quirks. And that's great. Like, if you're coping and everything's great, if your child is, I think quirky is a word I hear a lot with people that understand that the children have struggles but don't have an assessment and like aren't pursuing that. If you are coping now, I'm genuinely thrilled. That's great. But the concern is, as they get older, then the challenges may be more difficult. They're going to be expected to sit still for longer, to adhere to different routines. They're going to be expected, when they go to secondary school, to move from room to room. They're going to be expected to mix with different people. They're going to be expected to sit in exams, stuff that they're not expected to do when they're very small. So you don't know if your child is going to, quote unquote, grow out of it. And I think children only grow out of it. I don't think they grow out of autism. I think sometimes parents see things and are concerned about them, and then those particular traits no longer present themselves, and those particular challenges no longer are there. So it might be, like I said earlier in the podcast, if you put your child's name down now because you're worried about X, Y, and Z, in a few years' time, because it honestly might take that long, when you finally get a letter saying you've got an appointment, you might think, wow, that thing I was worried about is just not a concern anymore. I don't need this appointment anymore. Thanks so much. Hand it on to the next guy. Or you might be going, oh, wow, the challenges have got so much more intense. I'm so glad that I did put their name down when I did. And well, I hope and keep everything crossed for you that if things are going well, they continue to do so. I feel like getting that assessment helps you to future-proof, because you're that little step closer to being able to get your child any help and understanding that they need, if they need it, which you're only going to know by getting an assessment. And these assessments, honestly, they're so in depth. I think people worry about getting like a false positive. Having watched them, I don't think that is the case. And some of the people that assessed my children I know to be very high up in their field, very, very experienced, and I trust them completely. And I remember having a conversation with two of them that assessed one of my children after the assessment, and they said, I honestly, until we do the maths on this and add up the scores, I don't know how this is going to come out. I couldn't tell you. So it's a system. It's, it's very detailed. And Personally, and this is my opinion, I do trust that system that I witnessed. It's getting a child to as far as the assessment is quite challenging, but I believed it wasn't missing things and it wasn't showing up things that weren't there. I was very concerned before I ever saw an assessment that I guess masking would happen and the difficulties wouldn't be picked up. But I would say, in my experience, from what I've witnessed, that is no longer a concern, that would happen. And you've just got to remember, it changes nothing. They're not going to diagnose a child with something they don't have. It's not in anyone's interest to do that. They may highlight difficulties that you weren't aware of, and that way you can deal with them. But getting your child assessed for autism is not going to give them autism. It's just going to tell you, is it already there or is it not there? And then you'll know. And then hopefully you can move forward and you can deal with whatever is or is not there. So thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk with Rhi. Please do make sure to leave any questions that you have down in the comments. I will endeavour to answer them in future episodes, and I shall speak to you all next week. Bye.